Hi, Smirconishers. Welcome back to smirconish.com. This is the editor's report, and I'm your editor, Gili. It's been another crazy week of news and emotions, and I hope everybody got a chance to tune in to SiriusXM. But as you know, I am here to tell you about all the original content that we like to call critical thinking, available at smirconish.com this week. So here we go. First up, we have James Craven, who wrote a piece called On the Green, discussing how he is a small business owner in a suburban majority white town and how he decided to join the protests instead of buying extra plywood to put up on his store and what that experience taught him. Next up, we have Thomas Koenig, who wrote a piece called Voted for Trump in 2016. Here's Why You Shouldn't in 2020, where he tries to persuade all the Trump supporters from these past 4 years to make the switch and actually vote against their previous nominee. Next up, we have David Struwe, who wrote a piece called Restricting Religion in the Age of Protest, discussing how the First Amendment in a pandemic works on the legal side and how protests can be handled in the courts during this time. Next up, we have David Allen with a piece called Don't Sleep on Ohio, discussing how the swing state of Ohio has always been won by the Republican president ever since 1980, and how it is crucial for either of the nominees to win this state in order to win the election. Next up, we have Denise Meredith, who wrote a piece called Those Who March, discussing the diversity of the protesters this time around and how it's different from the lack of diversity of the protesters in the 60s. Then we have John Veet, who wrote a piece called Trump Blames Antifa, but Jeff Sessions Created a Climate of Police Impunity, where he discusses the history of police brutality and how the lack of supervision and lack of accountability actually traces back to the current administration and the repealing of certain laws. Next, we have Rich Zaccaroli, who wrote a piece called Mail-in Voting and the Threat to the Underlying Democratic Principle of Majority Rule, discussing how important it is to get out the vote this election, especially with the pandemic in the background, and doing it safely through the mail-in ballot systems. Then we have Glenn Rabney, who wrote a piece called We've Come Far, but It's Still a Long, Slow Trip, discussing how America is progressively becoming a less racist country, but how there's a long, long way to go before we reach equality, true equality. Then we have John Hamill, who wrote a piece called We Need the Adoption of a Civil Rights Act of 2020, discussing what he thinks this movement should bring in legislation. Then we have Margaret James, who wrote a piece called Systematic Police Racism, How to Identify the Bad Apples, discussing police brutality in America today, what terms should be used, and how to understand who is fighting for your rights and who is not in the police service. Lastly, we have Gregory Huckstep, who discusses a piece called Perspectives on a Pause, where he discusses one of Michael's segments on racism in the past few weeks on SiriusXM and how important it is for everybody to have these conversations and reflections about their own privilege and the inequality in America and how white people should learn not to be threatened by equality. That's all for this week. Thanks for tuning into the editor's report. If you have any ideas to write an essay for us, please send me an email to editor@smirconish.com. I would love to work with you and publish your ideas on our site. Just make sure it's not defamatory and that you critically think when you write it. So no talking points. Make sure to tune into Smirconish at CNN tomorrow, Saturday, every morning at 9 a.m. And of course, every weekday from 9 to 12 every morning on the Michael Smirconish program at SiriusXM. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great weekend and enjoy the beginning of summer.